Hi, my name's Keith Cooper. This is one of a series of short videos looking at different aspects of printing using the Epson P5000 printer. Now I'm going to have a lot more detail about it in a review, and I've got lots of other things to cover with it, but this is just looking at some of the basics of making a print. In this instance, I'm going to use a Baryta paper, so I'm printing a colour print. The image here is a commercial one I produced for a company as a large print for a trade show. It was, I think it was printed at nearly 3 meters high, needed to be colourful, needed to have products in it, hence the sort of bright colour of the picture there. It should print well on this Baryta paper. This is one from a local company, Paper Spectrum, here in Leicester in the UK. It's Pinnacle. It's a 300 gram Baryta paper. So it's got a smooth finish but not a gloss finish on it, and there's a nice heavy paper, which since I'm printing at A2, heavy papers work better. Feeding thin papers at A2 gets a bit more, and they're trickier to handle. The larger the print you get, the more care you have to take, and I would say if you're using papers like this, A2 size papers in a box, be careful how you store them, because it's easy for papers with humidity changes and things just to get a little curl at the corners, and the last thing you want on prints like this or paper like this going through a printer is curl on the corners, because you're likely to get head strikes, particularly if it's large paper sheet like this. Now this printer here is, I would say, ideal. It's good for sheet printing, but it's the roll printing where it really excels. Certainly much better, because it's got a built-in cutter amongst other things, than say the P900. But I'll be having a look, if you're wondering whether something like this had better suit you than the P900. I will be looking at that specifically, but I just make a note of that. Now the image here, I'm printing from Photoshop. I could print perfectly well from Epson Print Layout, for example, and I've got a black and white print example showing using Epson Print Layout. Now the important thing here, and I'm just going to fire off the print dialog, take a moment or two, because it's not a particularly new laptop. It still works fine. This is actually still running Photoshop CS6. I've got the new current Photoshop on my main computer, but this one here still works just fine for printing, testing work like this. Here's the picture. Now, I would like to print this borderless, to show you a borderless print, but this printer doesn't do borderless on sheet paper. Part of that is because of the paper feed mechanism. Now the paper feed mechanism on the P5000 is very good. It has a vacuum system, so it holds the paper flat as it goes through. But to print borderless, you need to pull the paper through rather than just drive it through normal rollers. You've got at the end of the paper where it goes through, something needs to draw that paper out, and there's not the same sort of mechanism here. Now there are rollers in this, and I've got some details in the written review for this printer of the of the paper feed, but it's not the same type of paper feed as you get on something like the P900 and smaller printers. I've got enforced borders, and the borders on this are slightly larger on the trailing edge than they are on the leading edge. You have to be careful with that when you're doing print layout. If you use the Epson Print Layout software, it does handle this quite well, but whatever software you're using, whether you're using Photoshop here, Affinity Photo, Lightroom, be careful with your borders for things like this in setting out your borders, because they are not fully symmetrical, and that goes for custom page sizes as well if you're going to be using those. But here I'm just printing using the Photoshop dialog. I've moved it, I've centered the image. Now I've had to crop the image slightly to give it the right aspect ratio to fit on this paper. Think of that when you're doing the printing. What are you going to actually use the print for? If it's just a print that's going to be shown on its own, then the border is part of the layout of the print. If you're printing just to put it behind a mat, then it's less important, because that part's not going to be seen. So always think about what you're actually going to do with the print before you make your decisions on borders here. Now the printer does print borderless, and I will show this when I'm discussing some roll paper, in that it expands the picture widthwise and then cuts the paper to give you a borderless print. You lose a bit of paper at top and bottom, but it gives you a borderless print. Now, if you're interested in that, I put a link to the main written review, which I've written some time ago for this particular printer. As I say, a video review of it, a shorter overview, is on its way. But if you want details, have a look at the written review, which I've got in the links for this video. And I look at the different options and the different ways you can cut the paper to get borderless. But you've got a range of borderless options off roll paper. You don't get proper borderless off sheet paper. If you want that, buy a smaller printer. Big printers do not do borderless. In fact, larger versions of the printer than this, the larger format like the P7500 I looked at, they have even larger borders enforced on the paper feed. Different type of paper feed on it, but same vacuum feed. This is essentially a small, large format printer. Now, here's the print I've got here in Photoshop Dialog. I've selected a printer profile, and it says P5000, pin bar 300, PLPP260. What does all that mean? Well, P5000, the printer. Pin bar 300, Pinnacle Baryta 300, so I remember this. I made this profile several years ago, so give your profiles meaningful names, because then when you come to use them again, you won't be thinking, now what settings did I use for making that? PLPP 260, Premium Luster Photo Paper 260. It's a standard setting when profiling papers like this. Now, there are Baryta settings in this, and I'll look at custom settings when I cover things like profiling with the P5000 and media settings as how to get the best out of it. But this one here, this paper, works just fine. It's using the Premium Luster Photo 260, which is standard one for this. And all I need to do, I've set this, I'll just check the print settings. Now, for the print settings, I've selected the manual feed, so the top feed for the printer. I've selected quality level of 1440. It's not the highest, but I've selected the super microwave on it. I'm going to be doing some more testing on optimal details, but I'm feeding an image to this at 430 pixels per inch. It works out at this size. That's good, should give good detail. You do not need to set printers to specific values of dots per inch or pixels per inch when you're using them. That used to be maybe true years ago, not anymore. But once again, something I'll be coming back to, but I've looked at for several other printers, such as the P900, 700. But there we go, there are all the settings, manual feed. I've loaded the paper into this, pushed it up to the rollers, put load, it's loaded in, it's done a skew check, and it's checked that the paper is okay. And I've got everything set there. And all I need here is just press print, and we should be able to get a print out of it. Well, the printer's waking up. The fans keep it clean, keep dust out of it, help for print drying, and the vacuum system make quite a bit of noise. I've loaded the paper into this, and I've pushed it up to the roller. It's loaded. I've set the paper type here as PLPP 260, so it's ready to go. It has a sheet loaded at the back there. Take it a while to process the image from the computer there, from the laptop, an old laptop. Now, because I've got some lights up here, I can see here the print, the start of the print. I can see it through the window here. There are no lights inside the printer like there are on some of the newer ones, but I can see the print is starting, see the leading edge of the print, and it looks fine. Now, the bright colours in this particular image do work well. I know on this printer before, I've tested this image on some similar printers as well. And I have an orange ink in this, orange green ink. They give a slightly larger gamut, and it prints bright colours very well. But anyway, we'll let this run through and see what it actually looks like. Here comes the front of the print. Now, as you can see, the paper path in this, paper comes down, it has to bend quite sharply, and it comes out the front here. There is a straight through print path if you want, if you have stiffer media, and you can actually print perfectly well on A2 board on this. The only thing I would say, if I was to try and print A2 board on this printer as it's set up here, you load the paper or the board from the front and it takes it through and it comes out the back, and an A2 board would go out the back about 6 inches further than the distance it is to the wall. So all you would get is it would shoot out the back and hit the wall and make a nasty noise, and it's powerful enough that it will damage the wall, the wallpaper on the wall, and it will also damage the media. So if you're going to print on solid media using the straight through print path, then make sure you've got far more space at the back than I've got here. Now I've got some examples in the written review where I have actually used it, but the printer had more space behind it there, and I've covered that in that. But the print looks great. The colours are nice and bright. As I say, it's at 1440 resolution, and I've got it on unidirectional printing. That slows it a little bit. I've not switched on the fast printing. Unidirectional printing is generally slightly better to use. Now, you can calibrate printers, their paper feed. You can calibrate it individually for specific media types on this. But bidirectional, there is always a dependence of the height of the head above the paper, the alignment of the ink drops, and quite often if you try and print too fast at high quality settings on some printers, you will see a very, very slight horizontal banding. Now that can be adjusted, but it's much easier to set things up for accuracy if you just take the hit on time and just print single unidirectional. So it's the print header's going backwards and forwards, but it's only printing on the travels this direction. Then it goes back, paper advances, it goes across again. Just makes for slightly more accurate printing. If some papers, particularly glossy papers, where if you've got a lot of ink going down on the paper, so very strong colours, dark areas, you are pushing it in your chances of getting banding if you use bidirectional. Now, it slows things down, and usually the print settings for the highest quality settings will automatically go to unidirectional. Bidirectional is a speed thing. It just means the print comes out quicker. If you want the best quality, and with solid areas of colour like this, I do not want any chance of banding. You just get it to print. Goes for all printers, Canon and Epson. If you use unidirectional printing, it's typically less likely to show issues. Now, the issues come from a variety of sources, but I say one of the things is this is not an Epson paper. I haven't set up a custom media type for this particular paper. In setting up the custom media type, I would use some tests, run some tests, and make some alignment changes. This sort of printer has a lot of adjustments on it that you can tweak and change just to get the absolute best quality out of it. Now, I've done this for a few papers where I want really top-notch prints where I'm putting them on relatively glossy surfaces and any faults will show up. It works well, but you do have to take a bit of care, and if you want it to print well, you also have to be prepared for it to take a little bit longer to print. This can, print quite quickly in a draft mode or even a, medium-low quality mode. Most people wouldn't notice the difference, but you might. If you're printing stuff at A2 like this, and I say A2, what's that? 16 by 23 inch, something like that. If you're printing that size, well, it's worth doing it properly. And anyway, there is the image. I can see here, hopefully it shows up in the video, these colours are really nice and strong. Now I know this image works well, I've used it before, but on a Baryta paper like this, that's it. Takes no real effort at all. Just remember, be careful with your margins and your layout, and also if you want borderless, get a 17-inch roll and print borderless to your heart's content. Get 10-inch, 11-inch, 8-inch roll I think is supported as well, 13-inch roll. Any of those are supported as borderless sizes, but not ordinary sheet printing. But there you go, simple basic print. So hopefully that's useful. I'll have more of these videos. Thanks for watching. Please do subscribe to the channel if you find it useful. It's much appreciated. And if you've got any questions, please do ask, because it's people asking questions about stuff that often gives me ideas for new videos and articles. So thanks.